And welcome to TCS World Travel's Discovery Series. We are so happy to have you join us today as we embark on a virtual journey with award-winning travel writer, Andrew Evans. Andrew is a beloved on-trip expert with TCS, and this is his second webinar presentation with us. Today, Andrew will explore why particular places become iconic destinations. He will be in conversation with TCS's own Susie Lukacs, and they have a fascinating program planned for us today. My name is Tessa Helber, and I am on the product development team here at TCS, and I'd like to cover a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. First, please turn the volume all the way up on whatever device you're listening to us on. Your audio automatically muted when you joined, but you can reach us in real time by using the Q&A box found on the bottom of your screen. Please click that button and type in any question or concern you have, and we will respond during the broadcast. Your submissions are private, only visible to TCS staff. So please use this to contact us, especially if you're experiencing any technical difficulties. We have staff at the ready to support any issues. Your screen should currently display the presenter box, where you see me, as well as the presentation box. The presenter and presentation boxes are resizable and movable. Click on the ribbon at the top of the boxes with your cursor to move them or resize them to make them fit your particular screen. Please take a minute to configure those boxes to best fit your device. Also, on the bottom of your screen to the right of the Q&A box is the Resources button. If you click on that button, you will find TCS Journey itineraries and travel information. All of these are downloadable during the webcast. To the right of the Resource button is the Speaker Bio, where you can learn a little bit more about Andrew and his background. And the last button on the right is the Survey button. The survey will automatically pop up at the end of the broadcast, but you can fill it out during the broadcast as well. It's very short, just 3 questions, but your answers really help inform us as we plan our trips in 2022, 2023, and beyond. So thank you in advance. Similarly, we will be sending out 2 polling questions during the event today. You will see those appear in the TCS presenters box. These are simple questions, but really do help inform us. We're going to send out the first question now so you know what to expect. Great, I already see some responses coming in already, so thank you. Without further ado, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce my colleague, Susie Lukacs. Susie is a Director of Business Development at TCS. She began her professional life as a Foreign Service Officer with the U.S. Department of State with a commitment to international cooperation and global exploration. At TCS, she continues this work through our richly curated educational and immersive travel experiences. Over to you, Susie.
Thank you so much, Tessa. As Tessa mentioned, I've been working my entire adult life to expand and advance the understanding of different cultures around the globe. TCS shares this commitment, and we provide our guests a robust enrichment program on every journey. One aspect of that is working with phenomenal experts to curate relevant and engaging content, which is delivered through a variety of avenues on our trips and now through these webinars. For today's webinar, we've brought back one of TCS's exceptional experts to explore why some places become iconic destinations and others, while maybe worthy, they just don't. To help us understand what propels us to seek out specific places, we are joined today by author, speaker, TV host, and most importantly, beloved TCS on-trip expert, Andrew Evans. Andrew is a renowned travel writer. He has contributed to National Geographic Traveler, National Geographic, BBC Traveler, Outside Magazine, and many more. His work has taken him to all 7 continents, I'm very jealous, and over 100 countries. By sharing his experiences and expertise, he inspires the explorer in all of us. Andrew's passion for meaningful travel is clear in every aspect of his work, his words, his sense of humor, and will no doubt be part of our conversations today. So welcome back, Andrew. We are just thrilled to have you with us again.
Thank you so much, Susie. I'm thrilled to be here and to join all of you today.
Great. Well, let's jump right into the question at hand. What attracts us to specific locations over others? Why are some places overlooked that may be worthy? but we seek out these destinations that are so iconic.
Well, that's a good question, Susie. I think we have to remember that travel is very personal, and we all have to tell ourselves that. We can't be too judgmental of the way other people do it. But let's start with this idea of iconic. And what is an icon? Marilyn Monroe is an icon. We talk about her as an icon. And if we look at the Greek word icon, it means image or likeness. So when we look at an image of Marilyn Monroe, who was a movie star and a model, what does it represent? She represents beauty. She represents femininity, womanhood. She's often referred to as a goddess even. And we do this. Even though she's passed away, this image evokes something that she lived with, that she was. And this goes on to an even spiritual context in religions, because when we talk about an icon, say in the Russian Orthodox Church, it's not just about the likeness and what it represents, but the icon itself holds the power of that thing. So this icon of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Jesus on the cross is a holy icon in that it doesn't just represent these characters and their ideologies, but it actually has the power that they hold. So when we travel to an iconic destination, we have to ask ourselves, what power am I tapping into? What tradition, what belief, what energy am I hoping to access? And this is something that propels all of us. When we go to Angkor Wat, the first European traveler to write about Angkor Wat was Henri Mouot, who was a French botanist, and he himself had read about the kingdom of Siam in a book. He was not the discoverer of Angkor Wat. There had been the whole Khmer civilization that continued to visit there. You had Buddhist pilgrims. You had other French and Portuguese explorers who had gone. But he drew a picture. He made an icon and sent this back to France. So he came upon this city. He was amazed by it. And the way he described it in his book in 1863, he compared these temples to he talked about Michelangelo, so an artist that people in Europe knew. He talked about ancient Greece and Rome. He talked about Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. So already he's invoking these Western icons to describe an Asian icon. And he even talks about ancient Egypt, and we can't fault him for that. These faces were huge, and the only other faces they had seen like that were the ones in Egypt. In fact, these faces on the Bayon temple, which was built in the 13th century, there's 216 of them that go around the temple, and it represents Avalokiteshvara, who is the bodhisattva of compassion. And this face, which is over 700 years old, is supposed to depict serenity. So it's evoking the concept of serenity. Now, we can't blame Henri Mouot for invoking Egypt, because the bas-relief on the side of these temples, and this is also from the Bayon temple if anyone's been there, beautiful bas-reliefs showing whole military histories, spiritual ideologies, mythologies. They tell a story. And Henri Mouot, after his book was published and became a hit all across Europe, he unfortunately passed away on his fourth expedition to Asia. But another French explorer came and took plaster casts of all of these bas-reliefs and the huge heads. These were sent back, and they were put in the Musée de l'Homme in Paris. So many of you have probably been there. It's right across, it's the Trocadero across from the Eiffel Tower. So from the mid-19th century all the way up until the Nazi occupation of France, these bas-reliefs and these statues from Angkor Wat were on display that introduced this site to millions of people. And again, you see the similarities with ancient Egypt. You have to think that France was obsessed with empire at this point. They're obsessed with ancient Egypt. Napoleon had been there. And also, you think about the Elgin marbles from the Parthenon in Greece, and they didn't take bas-reliefs. They just took them off and shipped them to London. So this was a little better than what we did to the Parthenon. But there was already this immediate connection, and the Empire of France begins to expand. In 1863, the same year that Henri Mouot publishes his book about Angkor Wat, is the founding of Cambodia, the modern nation of Cambodia, as a protectorate of France. Now, this is a modern-day flag of Cambodia, but it's very similar to the original one in 1863, which just had some extra blue right on the side. So for France, discovering this huge ancient site that they didn't know about, and for Cambodia, which is a site that really shows their own ancient civilization, the Khmer civilization, this is an important icon. The flag itself is an icon and has Angkor Wat in the middle. So what is Angkor Wat? What does it represent? Well, Angkor Wat, when we talk about it, is two different things. It's the whole complex. It's the largest religious complex in the world. It's 400 square kilometers, which is 2 District of Columbias or the nation of Andorra, so fairly large for a religious complex. We're also talking about the temple of Angkor Wat. And here we have the actual temple, which is a 5-towered temple. We see it in 2 dimensions here, which is why we only have the 3 towers. But this represents Mount Meru, which is the mountain at the middle of the cosmos in Hindu mythology. And there are 5 peaks, and the tallest peak is in the middle. So we have an icon of the universe put on the icon of a nation that's then representing the flag. And Mount Meru is at the center of the Hindu cosmos. And so this is a map of Angkor Wat. And when we look at Angkor Wat, the temple, and Angkor Wat, the entire complex, what it really is architecturally is a map of the universe. These were Hindus that were trying to build their mythological, cosmological understanding of what was out there in stone. So let's look at this map of Angkor Wat. And you see right at the center, we have the 4 towers and then 1 in the middle. So there's 5 peaks representing Mount Meru. Now it faces west, and west was the direction of Vishnu, the Hindu god that is in all things. It's in everything. And so here we are looking at a map of the universe, and there's moats around it, and different priests had different access to it. And if you know the saying, it's turtles all the way down, it comes from Hindu mythology, because Mount Meru is on top of many different things, elephants and snakes, but on the bottom of it all, it rests on the back of a tortoise. And the question is, what's beneath the tortoise? It's turtles all the way down. This is where it comes from. But what's most fascinating is that Mount Meru at the center of the cosmos, the earth, sun, moon, and stars, everything is going around it. So let's just jump out of Cambodia for a minute to one of my favorite places, India. I took this picture on the Ganges River just a couple of years ago with the sun coming down, the beautiful sun. And this is really what it's all about, because Hinduism is considered the oldest religion on earth. And when we look at its most basic principles, like all religions, it's man trying to come to terms with his experience on earth and knowing that there's something more out there. So this critical, fundamental relationship between man and the sun, it's in the Judeo-Christian tradition it comes from. We see it in the very first book of Genesis, the 3rd verse. In Hebrew, it's Yehi Or. In Latin, it's Lux Fiat, let there be light. So the sun is created and all things around it. Now we go back to Angkor Wat, and we see this map of Mount Meru, the middle of the universe, and we see the tallest tower, which all things are revolving around. And Angkor Wat is built so that when the sun rises on the spring equinox, it's lined up perfectly with that top tower. And this is phenomenal. It's not unique to Angkor Wat. There are many sites around the world that do this, but the fact that they built this, that they had this knowledge, that they had this understanding of their place in the cosmos is remarkable. So this is the icon of Angkor Wat, and we can experience it. So on my first trip to Angkor Wat with TCS, I took this picture at sunrise. It's not on the equinox. It was in April, so just a few weeks after. But you see that it's stunning, and it's a magical moment to be there. The problem is it's now magical for everybody. And suddenly we have thousands of tourists coming, all trying to recreate the icon. And this is where we have to be careful. And thank goodness, in my experience with TCS, they always try to avoid these situations. But these travelers are focused on recreating the icon rather than really tapping into the original understanding of the place. And this is what I really want to focus on today. This is what I think is important, because on my, these destinations that are iconic, we can lose their meaning over time. For instance, at Angkor Wat, the Temple of Ta Prohm, which in the map of the universe represents Mercury, a very spiritual place for both Buddhists and Hindus. And as a sidebar, if you want to go through the whole history of how is it Hindu and Buddhist and going back and forth, that's a whole other lecture. You can join us because it's a fascinating story. But here we have world-renowned actress Angelina Jolie using Ta Prohm, this spiritual Buddhist/Hindu temple, as a backdrop to the film Tomb Raider. It's a beautiful temple. You have these banyan trees of the jungle that are growing over it. It's very mysterious. It's mythological looking. But suddenly this movie that's based on a video game has replaced the meaning of this place, because the last time I was in Angkor Wat, and I've been fortunate to be there 4 or 5 times, all the signs, all of the guides, everybody was talking about the Tomb Raider temple. Can I have directions to the Tomb Raider temple? So after 900 years of history, this temple now is merely a backdrop in a video game. And I find that unfortunate. Thank goodness, when I went with TCS, we took part of this very special ritual at Angkor Wat, which is still a holy site. You still have Buddhist pilgrims coming there. We met with these Buddhist monks. We listened to their chanting. We meditated. And when we were done, they tied these red bands around our wrists. And I don't know if any of you have done this before. You'll be told different things in different Buddhist temples, that it's a sign of protection, of good luck, of fortune, all kinds of things. Red is the color of the root chakra in Ayurvedic medicine in Hinduism. So it's a grounding ritual that we're grounding. But in reality here, it actually represents the umbilical cord, because the umbilical cord is red, it's tied, and whenever you've had one of these tied, they tell you to leave it on until it falls off naturally, which is what happens with the umbilical cord after we're born. The reason this is important is because the real Sanskrit name for Mount Meru, the center of the universe, is the navel of the universe. So Angkor Wat is a physical representation of the navel of the universe. Now, when Henri Mouot, the French scholar, wrote his book, he translated it into French as nombril, which sounds more like belly button of the universe, which is slightly less romantic. But the idea still holds. And so to this day, as a traveler, here I am getting my umbilical cord tied. I'm grounding, I'm connecting myself back to the cosmos, which is a beautiful idea. And this is my suggestion, Susie, that really we try to tap into the original meaning of the place.
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Andrew. And I know both of us have been fortunate enough to visit Angkor Wat with TCS, and we are fortunate to be able to avoid crowds. But it's a place that's on the top of, it was on the top of my bucket list for a long time, as I'm sure it's on the top of many people. And you wonder before you go, will it really meet those expectations that I have? And I have to say, Angkor Wat exceeds every single one. And I think most of us that have visited feel the same. And when you showed the slide with the tourist taking that iconic photograph, I have to wonder, and I know others I'm sure do as well, is what role can we play as a conscientious traveler in preserving these very important and iconic destinations?
Well, I think that's an important question, and I think I love Angkor Wat as well. It's a phenomenal place, and in the 20 years I've been traveling there, I've seen it grow from just a few hundred travelers a day to now thousands, and I'm thrilled that so many people can see it. But you used the word conscientious, and I think we need to be conscientious. We have to think about the places we're going to and why we're going to these places. So when you stare at this picture right here, what does this conjure in your mind? We see sand dunes, we see camels. This could be in 24 different destinations that I've been to. We have to say, why is it one place and not another? We have to keep asking ourselves why. And I can tell you this is in Morocco at the far western edge of the Sahara Desert, in some fairly well-known sand dunes that tourists can access. And why is it that we can go to Morocco and perhaps not to Chad or southern Algeria or these other places? And in my case, as an American, it's because my country has a very long-standing relationship with Morocco, one of the oldest in my country, in fact, because in 1777, the Sultan of Morocco published a list of countries who were allowed to enter the ports of Morocco without paying any taxes. It was a free port. And on that list was the United States of America, which at the time was only 1 year old. So Morocco was the first country to recognize the independence of the United States of America. That was in 1777. Now, George Washington, the president, had to deal with the Revolutionary War and then all of the craziness of getting the Constitution written and all the rest. So he only responded to this official statement in recognition of the King of Morocco many years later in 1789. But this was the letter, and I'd just like to share it if that's okay, that George Washington, the first president of the United States, wrote back to the Sultan of Morocco. So this is our greatest leader writing to someone who was far wealthier than our entire country was. He said, "Within our territories there are no mines, whether of gold or silver, and this young nation, just recovering from the waste and dissolution of a long war, have not as yet had time to acquire riches by agriculture and commerce. but our soil is bountiful and our people industrious, and we have reason to flatter ourselves that we shall gradually become useful to our friends. So I love this letter. I find it very touching, very humbling, that this was the attitude of George Washington, who was the president of our country, who had won the war against Britain, and here he is bowing to this other leader. And a treaty was signed by Thomas Jefferson, who was our ambassador at large then. And this is the oldest unbroken treaty of friendships between two nations for the United States. So it's 235 years old this year, which is remarkable. Morocco is an ally. These are our friends. And after 200 years of this, it was very important during World War II that we had Morocco as an ally, because this was the site of the Ally invasion of North Africa that then moved around and came in through Italy as we fought back against the Axis in World War II. So the film Casablanca was released early in 1942 to coincide with this invasion of North Africa. And it was really done as a propaganda. I mean, it was already being planned to be done, but it was a propaganda piece because Americans were very reluctant to enter another world war. And when this came out, it worked. Suddenly, the whole country was fascinated by Morocco. Suddenly, we saw the good fight. The film is all about saving refugees who are pouring out of Europe. And even though the film actually was filmed in Van Nuys in California, had nothing to do with Morocco, it created this huge love affair with the country. And suddenly, every person of note wanted to go to Morocco. So a decade after, in 1953, you have Susie Parker, supermodel. She's 21 years old at the time. She gets sent on a 3-month photo shoot across Morocco. Here she is, Susie Parker, the highest paid supermodel in the 1950s, being photographed in Marrakesh. After her, suddenly the writers and poets and artists and beatniks all came to Morocco. So here in Marrakesh, we have Paul Bowles on the right, his wife Jane Bowles. Paul Bowles wrote Under the Sheltering Sky, an incredible novel about being in Marrakesh and then venturing out into the desert. Right in the middle, we have Truman Capote, renowned novelist of the 1950s. And on the far left, we have Tennessee Williams. So some of the greatest writers and thinkers of the time were hanging out in Marrakesh. This is followed by more photo shoots, by more fashion. And eventually in the 1960s, we have Yves Saint Laurent, who comes to Marrakesh. Now, Yves Saint Laurent was a Pied Noir, which means he was a Frenchman born in North Africa, in the colonies of Algeria, in Oran. Now, he went to Paris, and that's where he became famous. He was working for the House of Dior, but he always felt like an outsider because he was French, but not French. And often when we travel, we're looking for the parts of ourselves that we have lost. And Yves Saint Laurent found that in Marrakesh. He went to Marrakesh, he bought a house there. Here he is on the Jama al Fna. I'm sure some of you have been there before. It's a crazy marketplace. But we know it's Marrakesh because of that tower in the background. That's the Kutubia Mosque. The Kutubia Mosque is the icon that says we are in Marrakesh. And Yves Saint Laurent was so inspired by this place. So many of his designs come from the Bedouin costumes, the jewelry that inspired him that he saw in the colors. And when you go to Marrakesh today, you can still see these beautiful designs and artwork and colors that inspired so many artists and fashion collections. And you can see a lot of this came into the work of the house of Yves Saint Laurent. And I love going to Marrakesh and seeing these designs. And I have another talk I'd like to do to describe what these mean. And because these are all icons, all of these designs hold great significance. But what's also amazing about Marrakesh is that the lifestyle is still very much there. It's a different kind of icon because it's not just a site that we're going to take a picture of. It's tapping into that emotion. So I took this picture from my balcony where I was having dinner. There's very much a rooftop lifestyle in Marrakesh. The air is warm. It smells like orange flowers. A beautiful city. I'm missing it already just looking at this picture because this was taken back when I used to travel in 2019. And the fashion continues. This is a fashion shoot from just 3 years ago with the Kutubia Mosque in the background to make it clear this is happening in Marrakesh, a fashionable place. We have Nicole Kidman going to Marrakesh to be photographed in her desert outfits to promote her new film. And this tradition, the recreating of the icon, happens because if you go to Marrakesh today, you have thousands of Chinese Instagrammers who are all posing, and a lot of them have professional photographers with them to increase the number of likes and their popularity on Instagram. So we see how this original meaning of the place and its long journey then gets imprinted back on it and recreated. And we cannot fault these Chinese Instagrammers too much because we all do this. Any one of us who's ever been on safari has done the same thing. Because in 1838, a young British engineer who was working in India for the military, he got malaria and he was sent to the Cape in South Africa. And from there, he got very bored. He was there just to be healed. So he got a wagon, he got a gun, and he head off into the wilderness. And specifically, he went to Matabele land and Bechuana land, which is today Botswana. And he was very much a hunter. He shot a lot of animals. He shot a lot of elephants, which if you read his account, a narrative on an expedition in Southern Africa, which was a bestseller in London, he talks about this. It's a little disturbing. But he was also a very talented watercolor painter. And he painted pictures of animals that no one had ever seen before. And this was published in color, so people could see color prints of animals they had never seen before. It was astonishing for the population in Britain and across Western Europe. They had never seen a zebra before. Excuse me. And so suddenly, everybody wanted to do this. And at first, you have the nobility, those who can afford to launch an expedition. They want to mimic William Cornwallis Harris's expedition across Southern Africa. And then suddenly you have the bourgeoisie, and eventually it trickles down to the rest of us. And now all of us are going on what is now known as a safari. This was the birth of safari. Now the word safari just means travel in Arabic. So it's a travel into the wilderness. But there are very specific traditions. The clothes we wear, the way we talk about it, the game drives we do, are all mimicking this original 1838 exercise. I shot this picture in Botswana on a TCS around the world by private jet expedition. I love Botswana. It's so inspiring, and we can tap into that same tradition. Only now I'm shooting elephants with a camera, not a gun. And I remember this huge family of elephants, this family group just came rumbling down. Elephants are incredible creatures. African elephants are huge when you see them in the wild. And they come down to the water, and they immediately all begin to drink. And I found it so touching because the older, larger elephants pushed the babies and the younger ones up front to make sure that they could drink and get their fill. And for me, when you talk about being conscientious, Susie, this is what it's all about. It's about tapping into the original beauty and inspiration of these travel practices.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And you have certainly touched on things that have been transformational in my own traveling life. And safari is certainly at the top of that list. When you see the animals take care of their young and surround them, it touches your humanity, and it makes you appreciate that many species are there to promote and protect the next generation. So thank you for all of that illuminating discussion from Marrakesh onto safari. It makes me wonder how we expand our worldview so that we go beyond the popular tourist sites and discover new and meaningful destinations. And I'm just wondering how you approach something like that.
It's a good question. I think we can't get too focused on the bucket list. I don't know if I believe in the bucket list. I think we can fall in love with icons, but don't get so hung up as to miss other things which may be very personal or exciting to us. And an example of that for me is Machu Picchu. And Machu Picchu is an iconic destination. Everybody wants to go there. It's this sacred mountain, again, very similar to what we were talking about in Angkor Wat. It's a sacred mountain with the sacred city at the top, the heart of the civilization of the Inca, and it's based in Cusco. And Cusco in Quechua means navel, implying the navel of the universe. So here on the other side of the world, we have the same idea that's represented in Cambodia, totally different millennium, different civilization, but they're tapping into the same icon. So the Inca civilization, the navel of their universe, we're all very ethnocentric. It's a beautiful, iconic destination. We all want to go there. I have never been to Machu Picchu. I have made 3 attempts to go. I've been to Peru 4 times. I've never gotten there because it's always eluded me. The last time I tried to go there, the road got washed out by flash floods, and I had to return. And so I was traveling down the coast of Peru. So the icon, I missed it. It was inaccessible. Instead, I traveled the length of the Saturn Desert. Now, the Saturn Desert is one of the driest places on Earth. This particular shot I took, the size of the desert is that of about Florida, so it's almost 1,000 miles long, and it receives less than 1/10 of an inch of rain per year. So you're traveling along, and in my last book I wrote, a memoir called The Black Penguin, I described this desert as if watching television that's just playing static. I described it as if God had ran out of green and just left Peru unfinished. That's how it feels. It's remarkably barren, but beautiful in its barrenness. And the whole time I'm traveling across this 48-hour sand dune, I kept thinking, how did anyone live here? Nobody could have survived. There's no water, there's nothing. But then you get to Trujillo, and you find a whole civilization there, the Moche Civilization, which is one that I was not familiar with. People know, we've talked about the Parthenon, we've talked about Egypt, Jerusalem, Angkor Wat. People knew all of these civilizations. Why don't we know the Moche? Well, it's because when the Spanish came, they took all of their gold, they melted it down. Now, the Moche Civilization predates the Inca by over 1,000 years. We're talking from the 1st century AD up until the 8th, 9th century. And this is one of the very tiny gold figurines that survived the Spanish invasion. They threw in a few trinkets to send back to King Charles V to show him what it was that they were melting down. And this little gold jaguar is a very important religious symbol because for the Moche, in about 2,000 years ago in South America, gold was a symbol of the sun. It was an icon of the sun, and it was the power of the sun. So when somebody wore gold, they took on the power of the sun, and they called them a golden person. That was a Moche word for somebody who was enlightened. So wearing gold was actually invoking the power of the divine. And they took this to the next level in their own temples, and they built their own sacred mountains. This is the Huaca del Sol, the Temple of the Sun, again, on the other side of the world, the Temple of the Sun, made from 130 million adobe bricks, which is remarkable. Now, the Moche Civilization, which very few of us know, you can visit there. The archaeological work that's being done is very current. It's only in the 70s and 80s that archaeologists began to look at these places seriously and to understand there was a whole other civilization. Now, the Moche were taken over by the Chimu, and the Chimu civilization goes from about the 9th century AD up until 1470 when they were conquered by the Inca. So when we talk about iconic destinations, we focus on the one everyone knows about. But the ones everyone knows about is because they tend to be the victors. They are the ones that won because they had the military might, not necessarily the more culturally wealthy. And the Chimu civilization is fascinating. This is one of their cities, the largest city, called Chan Chan, also outside Trujillo, all built from adobe. They had a vast irrigation network that allowed them to live in the middle of this very dry desert. And Chan Chan in Chimu, Chan means sun. So and often in indigenous languages, repeating a word twice makes it even bigger. So Chan Chan means the great sun. That's the name of their city. And it was the largest city in South America at its time, over 60,000 inhabitants. You can visit there today. You can walk through these corridors. You can see the city. It's remarkable. Unfortunately, it's slowly washing away. With El Nino, with the earthquakes, with erosion and time, this doesn't stand up like the stones of Angkor Wat. So there is some urgency to visit it. And to answer your original question, Susie, I feel that we as the traveler hold some responsibility. When we choose to come to a place that may be lesser known, we make it iconic and we place importance on it so that there's more of an incentive to preserve it. And while we can't travel right now, hopefully soon, we still have access to these icons, these original ideas. I took this picture at the Escalante National Forest in southern Utah, right at sunrise. We have this relationship with the sun. And we see it across all civilizations and all the monuments we've built to it and the ideologies that it represents. So until we can travel together, I would urge you to get out there and to appreciate what we do have access to, and that all destinations represent these same ideas. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Andrew. What a fascinating presentation. And it really makes those of us that love to travel and explore and understand think again about where we want to go and experience. And personally, the north coast of Peru was not high on my list, but you put it up there. The Moche, I'm totally fascinated and look forward to hopefully visiting there someday. And we're so grateful to you for sharing your insights and your knowledge and your expertise with all of this. We do have some questions that have come in during your presentation. First, I'm going to send out a quick and our last polling question to everybody, but it follows along your conversation very well. Are you planning to travel internationally in the next 12 months? If you can please put in yes or no. I see the no question is not quite right, but the bottom choice would be no. If you could please respond, that would be terrific and help us out as we plan our journeys, as Tessa mentioned. And now we're going to go to the question and answers that I see here from the audience. So the first question, Andrew, why that slide loads, I'm not quite sure why that slide isn't loading. The first question that has come in is, what are your top 2, and this is in quotation marks, undiscovered bucket list destinations currently on your list?
Places that I have not been to?
Yeah, or even places that you think we as travelers and explorers should consider visiting.
Well, there's a lot of less visited places that I love, that I try to encourage people to visit close to home, somewhere that we can go to now without too much hassle. Is my favorite national park is Big Bend National Park in southern Texas. It's the least visited national park. This time of year, it's beautiful. You have all the cacti in bloom. You have desert wildflowers everywhere. It's a remarkable place because it's not easy to get to. You have to drive a long way. It's not visited like some of the other ones, but I love it, and I encourage people who've not been to Big Bend to go. Internationally, I'm a huge fan of Greenland and Iceland. I wrote a book about Iceland, but Iceland and Greenland are very different countries, and they're right next to each other. Greenland, to me, has huge mountains. It has the ice cap. It's what the Earth, I imagine, looked like during the Ice Age. So I love it up there. But places I haven't been yet, I've never been to Madagascar. And I really want to go. And even though I have been fortunate to travel to the places I've been to, the world is never finished. There's no list that you can tick off and be done. And so Madagascar, Greenland, Iceland, Big Bend. That's what I would say.
Well, and that brings me to the next question. Outside of Africa, where would you go to view wildlife? And maybe Madagascar ticks that one with the lemurs, but where else would you consider going?
Well, wildlife is always very important for me. I love experiencing it, and I think I'm a huge fan of India. It's a beautiful country. I've gone there to do stories on tigers, but what astounded me in India were the birds. The bird life in India is remarkable. I'm also an avid diver, so I love wildlife underwater in the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and then the Maldives. The Indian Ocean diving is so marvelous and exquisite, and it's pelagic, so you're drift diving, and you have lots of beautiful little fish, and then you have huge things as well. You'll have big schools of tuna swim by you, or hammerhead sharks. And also in the U.S., I would say Montana. I did a story for the Chicago Tribune on the American Prairie Reserve, which is in central Montana. It's the largest preserve of prairie landscapes. Huge herds of bison, prairie dogs, burrowing owls, pronghorn antelope. So Montana as well.
Well, that's great. That's great. I'm planning on going to Montana in May, as a matter of fact, so I will look up the American Prairie Reserve for sure. We have a question from a viewer that wanted to know if on our Around the World TCS trip in Angkor Wat, if that red yarn ceremony, which is the monk ceremony, if that's still continuing. And I just want to answer that to that viewer. Yes, that is still part of our ceremony when we visit Angkor Wat. And as Andrew and I have both participated in that, I can assure you it is extremely meaningful and a fascinating part of our visit there. Another question has come in, and I think this question comes from somebody that that must have maybe read your experience on your 12,000-mile public transportation journey from the U.S. to Ushuaia. They're asking if you, what was your most memorable experience on that extremely long journey? And I don't know if you can boil it down to one, or maybe share a little bit of what that journey was all about with our audience as well.
Sure. I mean, it's, I like to travel in different ways. I like to travel, it's great to travel on a private jet, but I also like to travel slowly. And I put a challenge in front of myself to travel from my home in Washington, D.C. to Antarctica using public transportation. And I embarked to do that. And I was publishing in real time on social media. And I went 12,000 miles overland. It's hard to narrow it down to one, but the thing that really stands out right now is the kindness of strangers. You know, I think the media gives us so much fear, and real travel teaches us the opposite, how kind and compassionate and welcoming total strangers can be on the other side of the world. And that really, essentially, we all want the same thing. So for me, I remember being in Guayaquil in Ecuador and being totally lost and confused, and things were a little dicey, and I had been given warnings, and just being adopted by this family in the bus station. And they just took me in, they found me a place to stay, they fed me. I, as a traveler, owe my whole existence to strangers on the road who've helped me out. So that, to me, is my big takeaway.
Well, what a wonderful takeaway. The kindness of humanity, and how lovely for you to share that with us. We have another question from a viewer who says, Andrew is an excellent photographer. What type of equipment does he use? And we get this question a lot on webinars, so we'd love your insight into that.
Well, thank you for the confidence. I shoot with whatever I have at the time. So that's the answer. I mean, I often travel with multiple cameras. More and more, I'm shooting on my iPhone. A lot of the pictures here that I showed you, I've shot, I use a Canon Mark IV 5D with either a 200 millimeter or 400 millimeter lens. I used to travel with a ton of gear. Now I've really tried to downsize it. I do like to bring a small collapsible tripod because I love taking pictures of the stars, or at least trying to. But that's my SLR. I shoot with my phone. Really, it's the camera you have. That's what I always say that matters, and how you use it, and really getting out there. One thing I've loved about traveling with TCS is the situations that we have access to. Really, just gives you incredible photographic opportunities. And Angkor Wat was one of them, where I felt like we could kind of get away from the crowds and really be in the cultural parts of that destination. Agreed
completely. And thank you for your technical insights, as well as your incredible insights all along on how we travel and what's important to us, and why we go to the links that we do to see places that are worthy and very special. And this is just an example of the content. If you travel with Andrew and travel with TCS, Andrew is leading our Around the World trip that leaves next February. So please, in the resources section of today's webinar, you can get more information, but we'd love to have you join us. And we're going to wrap up the Q&A now, and I'm going to send it back to Tessa to close out our webinar. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Back to you, Tessa.
Thanks so much, Susie. You can download more information about the Around the World journey in February 2022 from the resource section of this webinar. If you have any questions, please get in touch with us at TCS or with your trusted travel advisor. Remember to let us know what you thought of today's event by completing the survey on this page, which will also be emailed to you. And of course, a big thank you to you, our audience, for being with us today and for your interest in learning more about the history of some of the world's most iconic destinations. Like all of you, we are eager to get back out there to explore this amazing planet. Personally, I'd love to enjoy a cocktail on one of those rooftops in Marrakesh. But until we are able to do so, please continue joining us for our expert-driven Discovery series. We will be taking a break in May, but we'll be back with you in June. So watch your emails for our next invitation. And most importantly, stay safe and be well. And thank you again for joining us today. Take care.